Hi guys, my name is Borodante, and welcome back to Overpaint. Which means I go through my Patreon page and check out as many of your guys' submissions as possible, trying to give you some advice and maybe fix something. And boy do we have a lot of new submissions this time. So we have quite a lot of work to do, so we'll start exactly with that right after a quick word about this channel sponsor Wingfox and their new course called White Queen, Character Concept Design course. This immediately attracted my attention because it's like alter ego of my Black Widow or something, only this looks a lot more fortunate. So the lecturer is Fishman. So Fishman is back with a new awesome course. And as Fishman does, he actually uses a lot of photo bashing, as you can see right here. This is photo bashed base that he paints on top afterwards, getting a very painterly result in the end, as you can see, using 3D base for the whole model, photo bashing, and then rendering on top. So this is a very interesting course, focused on just one cool looking character right here. And you can see here's the work with the references, this is the 3D base. So the course is really fun, highly recommend checking it out. The affiliate link is in the description. It costs just $29 right now to start following it before it's fully released. So yeah, that's what's going on with Wingfox this week. Let's start the overpaint. Alright, so the first patient is Jupe Finn. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Sup Borodante, sup Jupe Finn. I've been a fan of yours for about a few years now, and recently I've been trying to get better at environmental art and dabble in art that has some elements of storytelling. Alright, so there are actually two versions here. This was the original submission, and this is a complete remake that Jupe Finn uploaded while they were waiting. And yeah, this is a huge progress. First of all, at least with the brushwork and the quality consistency of the image, it looks a lot more like a finished, polished product comparing to this version that has these soft, mushy brush strokes that combined with these sharp ones look really like everything's falling apart because of that. So the story is, this is what happens when the falling star reaches the ground, the earth, or the sea. And these are just some people that are witnessing what happened here. So right off the bat, I can't say a lot of bad things about the composition, comparing to the previous version as well. Like the previous version was very cramped in the center, with a lot of blank stuff around the picture, which is not exactly horrible, but you didn't really use the space, you know, you could show some kind of nature and work with the perspective better. But with the new version, it's not really an issue just because you just used your space more wisely, I guess. So I'll just go ahead and go through things that I think would look better if done a bit differently. So maybe I would, you know, use a bit more confidently this extra space in here. You added a little bit of the shore bits at the bottom, but they really feel like they're just almost like a frame, just a little bit, and it's kind of uncomfortable. It doesn't mean anything for the painting when you add a little bit of something like that. It should be either more or just get rid of it, which is also not exactly a crime. So this is a perfect place to play a bit with just the shape design and see what actually can work much more fun. You don't seem to work with foliage at all, but maybe it's a good idea to add some trees maybe. Let's go with a bit of a warmer green, should be pretty dark, and just maybe work with those shapes. And this way we'll introduce a little bit of this overlapping so we can see how this is the foreground, it's a bit darker, and then there's this whole bright aerial perspective that we can actually increase a little bit as well. So I'll just use the low opacity layer to just quickly add a little bit of that. Let's say it's a really bright light source. Since this is a star 5 minutes ago, it can light up the whole thing all over the place quite a lot in like big scale. And everything in the foreground should either be like in a separate layer, which is totally a good reason to use a separate layer in this case, just segregating complex aerial perspective gradient from whatever's happening on top of it that shouldn't be affected. So right now we're building up a little bit of like this mood that we're in the dark and then there's this really bright massive thing going on. Now for the core, what's interesting about cores, you had this differently in the first version. You were using like the blending mode, maybe add or color dodge or linear dodge that introduced this like realistic glowing effect. In this case, you switched to a normal just painting, which is great, but it doesn't mean we should give up the whole idea of, you know, showing the brightly glowing thing. So for that, I will just go ahead and do this. From the color that you used to have for the core, I'll just make it brighter and just push it and just get closer to white to make it, I guess, like this. And then at a certain point, like almost completely white for the pure core. And that's pretty much the way you show something really bright. You see, it's actually glowing now. While it didn't become desaturated, it's not just pale white. Now, the next thing I really would like to fix on the lighting, I would like to add at least some kind of shadows right here because it feels really just like that. Like I barely did anything, but there should be the feeling of contact between objects because this feels like I have no idea where they are. There's no hint on the shadow. It can be actually even more subtle, like even smaller, but you shouldn't see the perfectly sharp edge of just the outfits and then no shadow at all. And of course, you can add a little bit of more detail in here as well with just the same kind of approach by just showing some play on the light and shadow. That will be more than enough considering this is like a darker part. You can look up references of cliffs. Immediately you'll get a lot of material to work with, but of course you can do that yourself. Just don't forget that you can. And yeah, for the distant stuff, I would, you know, cover things up a bit with the aerial perspective. Like that part in particular really feels a bit like it shouldn't be that high contrast. So I would do it somewhat like this. Maybe even that part can be affected by that as well a bit. And maybe soften that edge a little bit. It feels really sharp and like it may be really close to that in reality, but considering this is a huge mountain, it should get at least some reflection from that water, while actually in reality, when you look at references of like, you know, non-still water with waves and everything, it actually doesn't reflect the big objects right behind it as much as you would expect. It works in a very diffusing way, but still, since this is a tall mountain and right there, you just fade that edge a little bit away and I think it will work much more naturally. Also, I would just show a little bit of the horizon, like this is really falling away a bit too much. I mean, maybe the horizon is literally close to that part, but it feels a bit more appropriate for it to be somewhere over there. And yeah, in this part, we can see how it's just curving, this cliff is curving towards us, which is, I get the idea behind it. We want to show this kind of what is the bay or whatever it is. But thing is, it shouldn't be that perfectly straight or the smooth, the curvature. We should show some overlapping, like you see you have these different planes and bits. It's like sharp mountains. It shouldn't be disabled when it's coming towards us. And when it comes towards us, it means there will be overlapping extra mountains going all over the place. So a bit like that. And yeah, I went with a bit of a more massive shadows right here, but really, really soft. Just basic ambient occlusion with from these tall, dark guys. It would have this soft look. And yeah, from this point, just work on higher detail of these silhouettes of the foliage. It can go as detailed as you want, and it's really not hard to do because you're almost playing with just the shadows here. One last thing I'll mention is the lighting on the orb itself of our star. I would just go ahead and light it a bit differently in terms of I'll make the bottom half a bit darker. The stuff stuff that's not facing the core, of course. When it's facing the core, it's all really bright and everything, but in terms of just the surface of the orb, it should be like lit by the skylight, so the top should be brighter than the bottom. And you can show some extra texture because this is a very high contrast lighting situation. A lot of stuff can be exposed with all these cracks and everything, as well as I would actually continue this trail of light on the water to almost the very bottom. It can go a lot lower because, again, that diffusion that won't let us show the perfect reflection of the mountain like this on the water, you know. It doesn't happen in the sea because waves, they diffuse so much that it doesn't really happen. But with the trails, it literally works the opposite because it's a very bright light source. Even the wave from over here will catch that stuff at least a little bit. That's why these trails tend to be really long when it's wavy and everything. And again, inside of the more saturated bits, you can add the brighter, paler cores and everything. And there you go, that's pretty much what we have. Honestly, I was only adding things. I wasn't removing anything because it just felt like you need a bit more ideas and ways to work with like scales and foreshortening and maybe like grounds. So, I don't know, looking up more artwork from other artists that do a lot of landscapes to figure out that, like, this kind of curvature is not really gonna work that well, and that's whenever there's foreshortening, like something going towards us, think about overlapping details. This is nature, nothing is purely straight or anything, so a lot of stuff will be going back and forth. Next patient, Maya. Hi, Maya. Hey Burrow, hope you're doing good. I finally joined Patreon and you are my first subscription. Thank you, that's really awesome. Alright, so this is, I guess, a Mad Pocahontas, I don't know. And Maya was going for very painterly looks, or so she used a lot of the paint style brushes like bristle brushes, and they're having a lot of problems with the perspective, which I'm not quite sure. I don't know how exactly skills work for people that paint horses and stuff. Like, is this from memory? If that's true, that's amazing. I have no idea how to do that. But my first thought was this was using a reference, but at the same time, Maya said they were having a problem with the perspective, especially on the forearm in here. So this looks really broken, and I agree. But generally, I wanted to say my main issue, I haven't noticed that at first when I was looking at the picture. Generally, I was looking at the stare of this warrior right here and the way he's going to send this arrow right into my eyeball. And that's really, really striking. So looking pretty cool. One thing that I have a problem with is, since you were going for this painterly style, I don't know, is this like a hot take? But I can't say that using all kinds of brushes will ever give you a painterly look. You just look at the fact that there are these really rough textures in here, overlaid with a bunch of these cloud textures on top. There are photo textures. That doesn't work. Paintings don't look like that. This immediately looks like Photoshop. Just a bunch of textures overlaid over each other, and that's it. It really breaks that feeling. And it's not just about, oh, it doesn't look really painterly, so I guess I'm just not doing the painterly style. No, it just looks bad. Like, this is, at least not the way to use textures, I think. I'm especially having a lot of problem with like the bottom half, I guess, but also because it doesn't really bring the feeling of perspective. I don't see how exactly the horse is standing on what kind of ground, you know? The whole ground everywhere feels like just an abstraction that's not really following any true geometry. And when the character, the horse in this case, is standing on the ground, we need to kind of show that interaction between two objects, the horse and the ground. I would really go for something a bit more defined in there. While again, I'm not familiar with the geometry of horses all that much. Let me quickly look it up maybe. Alright, got it. So you know what? I'm actually gonna go with introducing a different style of shading in here. Something quite a bit more painterly, I guess. So we have this sunset or sunrise going on, and we'll have all of this dust that is picked up. It will be lit up by that sunset at the top half at least, you know? And with that, we'll have a stronger silhouette of the horse, like this, a bit more confident shape in here. So yeah, going back to the whole painterly look and how to achieve it, I recommend just choosing your brush, one brush. In my case, like I have this brush, it has this bristly kind of look. The bristles are pretty big to achieve the more of a wet look. The tinier the bristles, the more dry it looks, and I really don't think it ever works well. And yeah, it has this canvas texture kind of, and that's basically my painterly brush. And from that point, it's just all about the brushwork, the way you just consistently define shapes, the way a person actually painting with oil would be doing that. Yeah, I'm really not sure this anatomy right here is legit. So I'm not sure if you really need to show those little mountains over there. They really show the location, I guess, but since we're picking up dust, I don't think we'll actually be able to see it. Like, we can save a little spot, but really, it brings this, like, we see the pure horizon. The whole scene is kinda dynamic, while that horizon is breaking that dynamics quite a lot. So maybe just show one thing well instead of trying to show everything, you know? We already have the sunset in there, breaking in quite a lot. So yeah, showing the ground, I'm starting with just a little bit of this shadow between the legs and here. Generally, I'm trying to replace this very semi-transparent abundance of brushstrokes that none of them are actually covering up the previous brushstroke. That's not the way a painterly look goes, so it should be much more specific. If you're putting down a certain color on the canvas, it needs to be a bit more opaque, I guess. It requires a bit like different settings of your brush. Don't use the opacity, like don't lower it, especially with pen pressure controls or anything like that. It needs to be mostly the flow brush. Like in here, I have pen pressure for flow, but opacity is not affected. Let's add a little bit of that shine on the leg. I think it's appropriate in this case. So I just added a bit of the foreground dust covering up everything and lowered the opacity just to introduce this extra colors. But then I merge it down and keep working to to push these colors around and achieve the consistent brushwork again. That's just for that painterly look again. I'm using really bright colors on the edges right here for the objects because they're mostly like reflecting the sun. They're not really lit by it, but they're reflected. Now for the arm right here, I really think the main problem, like it's having a big issue if you look closer. The problem is I can see it's just the forearm, like this part, that is just like this, and then the arm is like this. If I put the arm forward, well, we shouldn't have such a strong perspective as I have right now. You can see this bump right here. It's covered by the shirt, but this is the muscles of the forearm, and they pretty much think of it as like a bit naturally a bit bloated shape of a cylinder. So when you're looking at a cylinder from a side, it's aligned, but when it's going like this, it's mostly the round shape. So don't look for a straight line of a cylinder that is rotated that much. You need to show this muscle, this bump. It needs to be covering up whatever's happening behind it. And that's the main thing. Whenever you go for this foreshortening thing, same as with the previous submission, always look mostly for the overlapping shapes. They're a lot more likely to happen contrary to any kind of straight lines. It's almost impossible to see that happening. So if I show a little bit of that bump like this, making sure I only use these circular brush strokes because nothing can be straightened here. It's just a cylinder and we're looking at it from the top or something. As you did here with the wrinkles on this outfit right here, but same goes for everything. This round shape of the arm, it also needs to be defined with the circular motion. So I added some of the same colors from the leg because I think they really talk to the lighting of the sun over there. So yeah, same colors should be on the face because otherwise it really feels like this was lit by something else. So yeah, like this, and even I would go as far as I'll make the outfit a bit darker at the top since the main light source is way over there at the bottom. Maybe a bit warmer here, not as bright though. This is cloth. So yeah, without looking up any references, we have this kind of look. I would just keep going with this idea, not really using the motion blur as well because that's not really painterly, and just adding more to that weird feeling of just overlaying different effects that don't truly work together in one brushwork. And pretty much going all over the painting and replacing these weird photo clouds with just a nice design of your brushwork, just abstraction, repeating the shapes of the clouds, maybe introducing God rays that are going from over there, so a bit of the straight lines like this for the base, making it much more transparent, then erasing wherever it's covered by the horse. That would give us a cool look as well. But from there, again, we merge it down and just keep working on it in one layer. So yeah, obviously this work requires a lot of research with references and everything, but I think is getting somewhere. Next patient, Mia. Hi Mia. Hi Burrow, I'm glad I could finally join. Your channel gives great insight and I owe my renewed interest in art mainly to you. Thank you, that's awesome to hear. Alright, so this is a changeling bard from Dungeons & Dragons. And this is a unique take on the character with a lot of reference work. And the main issue is, in general, with the shading and with committing to lighting when it comes to shading the face. Which is an interesting topic. I guess the best advice would be to keep working with references, but not only for the design of the outfit, but look up how to shade wrinkles, how to shade cloth, how to shade hair, and maybe a face at that angle and stuff like that. You can find references for all kinds of stuff. It doesn't have to be the same type of outfit, but it may be the type of wrinkles you're going for. The best way to find that, I think, is like the fashion outfits photos from Pinterest. There's just a huge library of that going on in there. Honestly, it's hard for me to define the problem with the picture because it's like, it's not finished, so... But one thing I may have a problem with the original right here is that I'm not quite sure where the lighting is. Is it the ambient light kind of from the top, and then there's a rim light from the back? But like, what is this bright spot on the knife in here? So yeah, as you mentioned, you're afraid of shading the face because you think you'll ruin it. I guess that problem comes from the way many artists these days approach shading. They're not really thinking through the shape. They sort of master certain two-dimensional spots or outlines that work well for a face, and they just keep repeating it and polishing it without really thinking about the true three-dimensional object. And that makes it really hard to shade because what you have so precious in here is these certain spots you defined on the canvas, and you don't really know how you can ever change that. While if this would be the three-dimensional shape in your head, you would be able to add any kind of lighting on it, any kind of colors, and that shape wouldn't go anywhere. You still know what you have. So what I'd recommend doing is doing a bit of a research about the shapes of the faces that you like seeing in your paintings and trying to achieve that using a good tutorial about how to build the shape of the head with all the basic structures of starting with the cranial sphere, looking for the middle line, cutting out the sides, and then the back quarter right here is the ear and everything. And you build that shape trying to achieve the same look as you have. So in here we have quite a thin jaw like this, I guess. And you try to build it as much as you can with thinking through where everything truly goes, where are the lines of the cheekbone go and everything like that. So I would say the eyebrow, this is the part, the most indent part between the eyes on the nose. Never forget this one. It took me too long to learn how to keep it in mind. But yeah, good straight nose, like learn how it actually looks in 3 dimensions. So it would actually look the way you want it to be. So repeat your favorite spots or outlines with the actual 3D structure like this. It may take a while, but it's worth it. Maybe, you know, a bit break the nose like this in here. Well, not break, but curve, you know? And chip away that tip like that because it looks a bit off. And after you grasp the overall shape, go with smaller shapes. Never get into just the outlines. It's too easy to do that. Oh, I learned the overall shape of the head, I'm done. And then you just draw the eyes the way I pretty much did in here. No, you actually build it. You put the eyeball at a certain place and then you think about, you know, the planes of the stuff, like how the eyelids function. So they always have the extra like skin fold around them. I would probably make that cheek a bit thinner right here, and the ear seems to be a bit spikier on this one. So yeah, you just get that base and try to achieve that shape. After that, if you need a rim light, you will really know what exactly you need to do because you have the true 3-dimensional shapes to work upon when adding that lighting. Like, I'm not the best at this, just look up a good academic tutorial about how to build the head. The ugly one that's showing all the planes and everything. The ones that you guys usually don't want to look at because they don't look as nice as all these faces. But thing is, you can build these faces by following those tutorials. It's just up to you how you design those planes to follow this look. So yeah, that's what I have to say here. I don't know, I could keep shading, but pretty much it's the basic ambient occlusion and everything. It's more about knowing the geometry when shading. And with ambient occlusion in general, the best way is just studying references by actually copying the way ambient light acts on complex shapes. People wearing clothes. How the folds, how the armpit, how between the legs the lighting goes and everything. But choose the kind of photo that has not just the flat lighting of sorts, but something that you would be interested to show in your painting. Alright, next patient. Moses Moreno. Is that correct? I hope it is. Hi Borrow. Hi Moses. I can't believe I just discovered how to post on Patreon. That's a fun look. Very experimental in terms of using pretty complex lighting, which is honestly the best part about it. So let's see, everything can go pretty much the same route as I described in the previous submission, but like knowing your geometry, truly building shapes and everything. But how about, you know, not going that route immediately? And in this case, we just want to have fun and paint something complex. Maybe it won't be perfect, but how do we improve from a certain stage, from a certain look and skill level? So my best advice in here is to approach all the shapes as some sort of like sausage shapes when it comes to shading. While I would also probably change the composition a bit, by the way. So this way we get a bit more space, like the leg is not that close to the bottom and the center of the picture is a bit closer to the thirds, you know? So I'm not sure what's going on and probably it doesn't really matter. We just have some kind of magical thing. Maybe it used to be a toy, but then our character discovered it's something special. First of all, I'd make this light source, since this is the main light source, it needs to be much brighter than everything else. Definitely brighter than the shirt or this hoodie. It used to be literally the same brightness. It really feels off. Like, where is the actual light coming from? So we need to justify the fact that this thing is lighting up everything else. And it doesn't matter if it's dim or not. Like, generally, maybe it's not a very bright toy or something. There is no other light sources in the scene. This is the brightest thing in the room because everything else is visible because of the light coming from this thing. It needs to be much brighter. Our eyes are adjusted to a darker room. That's why this dim toy will be looking really bright. So I'll just imagine there's like a brighter core in the center. So through these little patterns of whatever it is on this ball, in the very center, we get the bright core as we look through it. And from this point, it's really good to think about it with that sausages idea, as I mentioned before. Sausages meaning like capsules, so a shape like this. And we put anything, or we represent anything as this kind of shape. So literally thinking about this as this three-dimensional shape and just using that idea for the basic shading. So we'll look for where that edge, like I'm showing where the edge of the lighting is. So after that, it will be dark, but where is it going on? In here, for instance, in here. So you try to figure out that terminator like this. And this way, everything on this side will be much brighter and everything on the opposite side will be dark, pretty much close to black. You can introduce a little bit of general ambience, so you wouldn't have like perfectly black shadows, but overall it's actually acceptable for this kind of scene to have almost completely black shadows. And then again, thinking about this direction, like what is the point that is closest and most like this 90 degrees angle to the light source, that's where the brightest spot will be. And then you just create a little bit of the gradient from it like that. And that's shading of all your objects pretty much. You obviously already know about adding some more saturated shadows to the skin so it would look better, so you can keep that in mind as well. If it's skin or even cloth is a bit translucent, most objects are, but to different degrees. So with that idea, you analyze like this arm is that kind of sausage, right? And here is this like unfinished sausage as well, you know, but also whenever you see a plane that's facing right at that light source, it's gonna be brighter. Like it's not the easiest thing in the world because you also, since this is a local light source, the closest to the light source objects will be much brighter. Anything that's going further away is gonna get darker and shouldn't be as bright as something right next to the light source. But don't overwhelm yourself much with it. Try to think of it as just like trying to develop this sixth sense about how the lighting works. You see a general shape, like a general shape of the head, of this face. So you don't really have to think through every little bump on it. That's gonna look really bad if you don't really like, you know, have a lot of experience in building complex shapes and everything, you know? Just think through basic stuff, like this overall capsule is facing the light source all over in here. I can see you introduce some of these wrinkles right here, maybe keep them a little bit. I can see the shading of the nose is done from the bottom. It's really cool. You really were playing with that shading. It's just go a bit more consistent with that, I guess. And for that, you need to think about the whole head or the whole face as this round shape first. That way you won't forget that the forehead is also facing upwards, you know, and it's getting darker the same way the top of the nose did. And starting with basic shapes like that, even though everything will maybe look a bit too round sometimes, it's actually a lot easier to then introduce certain deviations or to these shapes, like add maybe a wrinkle here and there or something, or mold them together like this, as this shirt is doing here. All that stuff is much easier when you have these overall shapes shaded. Let's cast a little bit of a shadow from the shorts on the leg like that. And especially on this side, because we're seeing inside the legs. So these shorts, they end around here. Like this is how they intersect if they would cut off like that. So they're casting a shadow on the leg right here. One interesting thing here, like I'm adding a little bit of a hint on that cast shadow in here from the overall body, right? Right here, the angle would be interesting to add a cast shadow from this leg, kind of like that. You know, using a bit of that blank space in the back. And generally with the composition and like the idea, you know, of course, maybe it was already quite overwhelming as it was, but generally the image looks pretty blank with this wall being so empty, you know? Maybe add like a photo in a frame that's also falling away. Like I already have this capsule that's kind of filling in that blank space, but these god rays, they're really hard to paint over. That's why I always segregate that stuff in a separate layer. You know, some kind of photo of a sunset at the sea or something. And it's like facing away, so we don't really have to paint it, but it has this sharp edge lit up by our light source. And that god ray is coming back. And yeah, by showing the shadow cast by that thing on the wall, we can show that it's actually pretty close to the wall. So yeah, just go ahead and keep on analyzing these shapes, maybe being a bit more confident with the shading. This thing can easily be really dark in here. I don't see any light really getting in there all that much. While things don't have to get completely black, still the wall that is catching generally the light going from the light source, even if there's like a cast shadow, probably from the character overall in there, behind the god rays. God rays are my nemesis. With something like that, still the back of that hoodie should be darker because it's facing completely away from the light source. Well, I mean, maybe it wouldn't be even, yeah, it would be even brighter than that cast shadow, but when there isn't a cast shadow, the wall should be brighter than the back of the character, because like in here again, there's some kind of glowing edge even going on, which is probably just to support the character without putting any thought to where that's coming from. Well, really, in this case, it's completely reasonable to make it the opposite, like completely dark. Because it's just this simple logic. If you keep following it, it will pay off always. Just shade those cylinders. If it's facing away, I actually didn't do it right myself as I was talking about it, so the back of an object in here, it's getting darker than that wall behind it. Little highlight on the nose is usually a thing. And you see even tiny details like this, the page of the book is turning upwards. That means it's facing away from the light source right away. And it's immediately looking like it's there. It's really cool. All the curvatures react to it. You can stylize the details, make objects simpler as you do. Generally, it has this nice round, closer to like a nice feeling of a cartoon style. But the shapes you show, the tiny details you show, there's no reason for them to not perfectly follow the logics of lighting. If you make it do that, it will look really cool. And yeah, you can introduce those cast shadows from pretty much everything, like this book in here as well. It's close to the bed sheet, like this. So there you go, even with this pretty blank environment, just adding one painting, I mean, I would probably put it like right here or something. Overall, adding all of these dynamic cast shadows that introduce all of this, like support this crazy dynamic lighting from the main object in the room, it already fills up the whole picture with very interesting events and I think looking pretty cool. Next patient. I think this is gonna be the last patient for today. Trim Brusette. Hey Boro, I have been following your channel for a few years now. I have something a bit different today. I know you don't typically do the traditional art on the channel, but I was wondering if you have any input on this piece. So this is a unicorn blooming with flowers inside of a gory meat-looking tunnel like this. And it's sort of like consuming this unicorn. So a pretty crazy and interesting concept here. So right away, the only thing I really want to talk about, since this is a middle stage of the painting, and Trim wanted to know if I have some thoughts before he moves on to actually adding details and everything. Well, the main thing I would change, like the composition and everything, I think it's looking just right. Not that we can do much about it either in traditional painting, but like I think it's pretty clear that the lighting source is the unicorn, so he's not just blooming with flowers, he's actually glowing. So with that in mind, maybe, I don't know, it's actually kind of weird to me to paint over a photograph of a traditional painting. I have no idea if what I'm doing makes any sense or is it gonna still be introduced later, but I would probably start with showing a bit more of a proper contrast. Maybe it's impossible to do at this stage, that's the thing, I don't really know. But in digital, the first thing I think about, you should like define the as closer to the final colors as you can, since you said you have this base made with acrylics and you will continue with oils. As far as I know, with oils you can paint over as much as you want, completely covering the old colors. So why not make the base looking more consistent to the, you know, the lighting, like if the unicorn is deep inside there and it's being consumed by this hole. The hole can show how it's like folding over by, you know, not being lit that brightly in here. We can see how the light coming from the unicorn is ending. It's being covered up. I think that will give a good message of this unicorn being devoured in a way. So yeah, a little bit, you see there's like angles, so each of these big wrinkles, like this one will probably be lit up more from the front, same as the back in there. Overall, I would say the frontal lighting on them, while the ones that are going further in front will have more and more of the darker part of that soft shape. The shape of this this thing right here, it feels a bit off. Like not off, it just feels unpleasant how it's sort of like sticking out from the ground, but then the unicorn is standing on it as if it's just the flat ground. It's really unpleasant in that sense. So I would maybe a bit, you know, put it away from the unicorn, let the unicorn stand just on the ground. So yeah, maybe you can do this now, maybe you will do it later, but that's something to keep in mind, that this kind of shading would be a good message about the context of what we're looking at. And yeah, I don't know if this is like liquid at the bottom, it very much may be. If it's a liquid, then of course maybe the reflection of a unicorn would look really cool in here. Not too intense, like maybe semi-transparent, pretty subtle color, right? So kind of like that. Still noticeable, but not breaking the overall. I can see a very strong message of just this cyan, really bright unicorn, and everything else is red. So there's not a lot of reflection or different colors going on, and even though our unicorn is this very saturated color, the lighting on the red womb, it almost looks like it's white. While it almost would be, because the cyan and red are pretty much opposite colors, so they wouldn't really colorize each other, they would mostly desaturate each other. But yeah, if this is not liquid, which as I think of it, it would be really cool if this is liquid. So playing around the edges of how water is going around all these things, I feel like it's water. But if it's not, or even if it is, actually, I would shade it away more in here as well. Light sources over there, so these bumps that are bright, they would get rarer and rarer. More and more rare, and being somewhat like this. I wonder where the blooming flowers will be added in the future. We have one in here, but as I understand, there will be like more going on. Maybe around the neck? like that and somewhat like this, like in these shapes. That would be cool. But yeah, that's what I have to say about this middle stage of a medium that I never even tried. Yeah, it's just the overall, like, that kind of lighting I would be going for. You can see how this feels like, I don't know, a unicorn is traveling in this tunnel, and this feels like unicorn is inside of something that is not exactly playing by the same rules as the unicorn. So that may be a much stronger effect even. I know how aggressive it should be. Maybe it makes sense to even add some kind of shapes that are sort of going towards the unicorn. Up to you. So yeah guys, this is it. Thank you for your submissions. This was a lot of fun to play around with things. So my initial plan at the beginning of this video was about that I'll be making an Overpaint episode every first Monday of the month to keep up with the new submissions. But right now I was going as fast as I could, maybe faster than I should have gone, and I didn't even get through half of the submissions that I got during March. And then I have quite a lot of April already, Mom's Spaghetti. And yeah, I think it shouldn't keep on going that way because it's not working out. The more I try to keep up, the more I promote Overpaint and the more submissions I get, so it's a never-ending story. The point is, I think I'm gonna have to raise the price on Overpaint. I really didn't want to do it. I wanted to get like more consistent or something, but it's just not possible. Again, I can't catch up. I think as you're watching this episode, I already changed the price on Overpaint. Right now it's still $5 right here, but it's I think it's gonna be at least 20 from now on. And yeah, we'll see. However it goes, I think it's just gonna stay at that price. I think it's reasonable to overall make a certain price out of the thing. I'd better get $20-25 from a few people that I know I can deliver to than getting $5 from such a huge amount of people, knowing then so many of you guys may never see an episode with your artwork. So yeah, that's gonna change. I'll make sure I'll finish all the submissions at $5 as they are, so don't worry about that. But more on that and more on other changes about my Patreon page this Thursday. Usually I end this by saying that if any of you guys want me to overpaint your picture like this, the link to my Patreon page is in the end of this video. That's still true, but I don't think you will be seeing this overpaint tier at $5 when you come here. So on that note, this is it. See you guys in the next video. Bye! Man, I really hope that at least without like getting too much into painting through each submission, I would be able to get through a lot more of them, you know, but it's not even close.